After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is the August Book Club book review, and this month it is a review of Malice in Wonderland, the inside story of the police investigation of the Laurel Canyon murders. This is by Tom Lange and Robert Souza. They were the original investigators of this case. So what I'm going to do is put a link down below. So if anybody has read the book and you want to come on camera and do a review with me, by all means, feel free to do so. Or if you just kind of want to hang out in the chat and listen to that review, feel free as well. Cats are in about the room tonight, so you may or may not see a cat. Usually I don't have them in here for this because, yeah, there's Leia now. Chances are she's going to jump up and knock stuff over, but that's okay. So let me go ahead and pin this. So again, this is the book this month. So I feel like as I show the book, it looks slightly thick from the side, but I feel like it looks much smaller on camera than the book actually is. So the back cover. So the back cover is mostly, well, there's a quote by Ed Nash and then just a couple of bullet points, which I found very interesting. Typically, most books that I review have either quotes from different sources, different news articles, media outlets, whatnot, or a description of what the book is, where this took a little bit of a different approach. So I was very interested in that, where again it has the one quote from Ed Nash and then just some bullet points about the case. So I found that very interesting. I will read those for you. So I will also say, if anybody is not familiar with this case, I'm not necessarily doing as deep of a dive into the Wonderland murders as I normally would for a book review where maybe the case is not as well known. When I do go through the review of the book and I do reference the case, I'm more so doing it so we can establish a timeline as well as what the where the authors are in the book, is, and they were the lead investigators on this case. You can kind of see as they're working through it in real time. But if you feel like I'm kind of missing, certain points of this book, or more so certain points of the case, I should say, there's a lot to the case. I feel like I could do a whole other show just on the case itself, but just in the interest of not having this be like a 6-hour book review. Because don't get your girl wrong, my notes were so long. And then I'm like, okay, this is a case where most people know it. So I don't need to put like the obvious things that people know. But I do want to leave things in there so you kind of follow along where the investigators are going. So you know what I mean, you know what I mean. So let me first read the back cover to you guys so you kind of get an idea of, if you are a reader just kind of browsing at a bookstore or online and you come across this and you see the back, kind of what the book is advertising it to be. So I typed it out. So it says, people have a habit of disappearing in the canyon. By the time they find you, Scott, I'll have every tooth in your head pulled so they can't even identify you, end quote. So that was a quote of trial testimony, and that was Ed Nash speaking to Scott Thorson. So right away, you are getting a quote from one of the major players in this case. And if you're not familiar with this case and you don't know who Ed Nash is, and you're reading that, you're probably thinking, this is a guy I don't want to fuck with. And you'd be right. So let's keep going on. So under that, the book says, in this no-holds-barred account of gruesome murder and deception, LAPD homicide cops Tom Lange and Bob Souza take the reader on a personal journey through the sensational case that disrupted and destroyed the lives and reputations of so many. And then below that, there are bullet points, as I mentioned. And those bullet points say, so 1, the first murder crime scene videotaped in California to be admitted into evidence in a murder trial. 2, In the minds of the cops, there's a federal agent out there working hard to, quote, derail, end quote, their murder investigation. 3, they discover there is an I in corruption, influence, intimidation, and insulation. 4, there are always questions where the investigators are investigated by their own. 5, suspects are victims and victims are suspects. 6, when a crime occurs in hell, you don't have angels as witnesses. And that last one is actually a quote by Detective Tom Lange. I love that quote for this book because, again, if you're familiar with this case, there are a lot of seedy characters that are involved, and I just feel like that quote really, really sums this up. So, again, a little bit of a different take on the back cover here, but I will say you get a couple of bullet points of what's going on here. So if I'm just picking this up and I'm kind of looking to see what this book is about, right away I'm going to be captured by, this is the first murder crime scene that was videotaped in California that was admitted into evidence in a murder trial. So that right away intrigues me because that's going to be something where for all the murder cases that we talk about, or for all the murder cases that are covered in books, podcasts, whatnot, this case, because of that one thing, offers something so different in trial. So right away, I'm intrigued by that. Again, these are the 2 detectives that led the investigation on this. So how many books are there about the Wonderland murders? There's so many. But not all of them, or I should say, the rest of them, are not from the lead detectives who worked this case, who know the ins and out, who know things that maybe the public wasn't privy to in the time that the information was coming out. And the reader's getting that from this. So any other book covering the case, okay, that's great. But this is going to give you insight that nobody else can give that type of insight for. And both of these detectives are retired now, so they really don't hold back, and you see that in this book. I liked that the book also, the back cover talks about federal agents working to derail the murder investigation. There is an eye in corruption. So right away you're just like, okay, we are also dealing with crooked cops, crooked people, so on and so forth. So there's a lot already entangled in this that as somebody picking up this book, you're like, okay. And again, to me, what the quote of Detective Tom Lange, when a crime occurs in hell, you don't have angels as witnesses. Love that. So even though this is a little bit of a different take on a back cover, love it. I will say, does it capture everything that the reader's going to get in the book? No. But with that being said, this case is so complex. There's so much to this case. I don't even know how they'd be able to do a back cover that like sums up the whole case, because I feel like you need a back cover and then an extra 5 back covers. So I feel like although this is vague, it's an artistic choice to be vague to, I feel like, for the reader to be like, I want to know more. Notice they don't say John Holmes on the back cover. They don't say any of the other victims in this, any of the other perpetrators, those who were involved in the robberies, so on and so forth. Because there's a lot of players in this. The only quote on here was from Ed Nash, and that was at trial. So I found that very interesting. So, is it James Watson? I actually am trying a new microphone tonight. So let me move it closer. So thank you for letting me know that. Okay. There. Is that better? All right. If that's not better, let me know. But thank you. Thank you, hon. Can barely hear, not just low. Really? Well, that's not fun. Okay. All right. Can barely hear, not just, no. Okay. As my cat breaks into my closet. You see that? Oh my gosh. All right, let me quickly just put up my avatar and change out my microphones to the one that I normally. Beckham, how is the volume to you? Just curious, because I am trying a new microphone tonight. If I need to swap out with my old one, I will do that. So quickly, Beckham, if you could let me know, that would be fabulous. James Watson. That's funny. It probably is just you, to be fair. But if Beckham goes against you and says that it's me, then I know it's legit. Let me know. If that's the case, I'll go in Avatar and grab the other microphone and switch it out. Yeah, as the cats destroy what's in my closet. Okay. All right. Bring it closer. It doesn't look like a distant. It is. Okay. All right. Hold on one moment. One moment. All right, back to my normal microphone. So that should be that. My apologies. I was all excited to try out this new one. I really should have done better before. So that's on me. My bad. There we go. Okay. Better? Better? Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. That's okay. That's okay. Just went over the back cover. So, unfortunately fixed. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciated. All right. All right. So, the book itself, it is 279 pages split through 25 chapters. 18 pages are of black and white photos. So, the reader does get a decent amount of photos. I will say the ones in there were all photos that I had really previously seen. There were none that were new to me. But with that being said, that's okay. And if the reader isn't familiar with this case, I think the photos that are put in there will be really helpful and pretty cool, because then they'll get to see a real insight into the case that they wouldn't know because they just weren't familiar with the case. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the book right away starts Monday, June 29th, 1981, mid-morning, and Ed Nash has a revolver jammed down his throat. The three intruders, they knew where his safe was. And the thing is, only a few people knew where the safe was. They took $100,000. Keep in mind, $100,000 back then, 1981. That's a lot of money. They took jewelry, they took cocaine, they took heroin, and they took a handgun. The intruders never had to warn Nash about going to the police. That would be the last thing he would do. So if you're not familiar with Ed Nash, right off the gate, you're learning, okay, this is a guy that is probably going to take matters into his own hands, and you would be right. So 3 intruders fled the house. They met one of their girlfriends and John Holmes. So then from there, as my book thing moves, we learn more about John Holmes. He is the one who set up the robbery. He was born August 8th, 1944, and John was very addicted to cocaine. The book from there then goes into a lot of detail about Ed Nash. He came from Lebanon and he was born mid 1950s, mid 50s. So the book then jumps ahead because now that we've established who John Holmes and Ed Nash is, who are really the biggest players of this case and of this book, we go to Tuesday, June 30th, 1981. And I will say right out the gate that the book is really good with letting you know where you are. And for the most part, it does go in chronological order. There's just this little bit of jumping that it does at the beginning, but it just goes to set the scene of where things were, gives a little bit of a breakdown of who John Holmes was, Ed Nash. Now we're back in real time. So again, and the book is very specific. So sometimes it will say, for example, June 30th, 1981, early morning. June 30th, 1981, late morning. June 30th, 1981, mid-afternoon, so on and so forth. It is very specific, especially when it comes to the murders and discovery of the murders in that time frame. It will get super specific. So just kind of keep that in mind. But as a reader, I love that stuff. I love that stuff. So thank you for putting that conversion out there. So $100,000 back in 81 would be the equivalent of $370,000 now. That is a lot of money to be taken in one robbery in cash. Thank you, James Watson. So on the night of June 30th, 1981, John Holmes went to the Donna Lona place to score some drugs at that house. He thought by doing this, it would make them not suspect that he was the one behind the robberies. So this Donna Lona place house that I'm describing, that's Ed Nash's. So again, the robbery happened. John Holmes thinks, I'm just going to go and they're not going to suspect me. Idiot. Like, idiot. So immediately he was tied to a chair and beaten. And according to Holmes, after Holmes was being threatened, he admitted it was him and laid out to everyone who was involved in the robbery setup that he commissioned. And right away, a plan was made for Ed Nash to seek revenge. The book then goes to the authors, Tom Lange and Bob Souza. They were the ones that were working that day. And we learn a little bit about what their workday was like, and the call comes in. They typically weren't partners, but for this case, they were assigned this together. So now we're going to get more specific. Wednesday, July 1st, 1981, 4 a.m. Susan Wenis and her husband Ron are in bed. Billy Deverell and Joy Miller are sleeping, and Barbara Richardson is asleep on the sofa. That is when the Ed Nash gang went in, and where these people were was at the Wonderland house. The book describes the ambush that was done to everyone in that house: Susan, Ron, Billy, Joy, and Barbara. The gang used pipes to bash everyone. At some point, John Holmes left a partial palm print on the upper left portion of the metal bed railing that was actually just above the skull of Ron. And James Watson is adding, when Nash caught Holmes, he was wearing some of Nash's stolen jewelry. Smart. Yeah, James, John Holmes was not the brightest, and that's just, can you say, Danny, that's your opinion? Yes, but I do feel as the reader reading this book, or even just the reader and researcher looking into this case, you're going to quickly see that and make your own conclusion about that. But I digress. Hello, Brian. And I missed somebody earlier. Nope. Rich, Karen Diamond. Hello. Okay. So now Wednesday, July 1st, 1981, midday. See what I mean about how it breaks down the time now so specifically? So somebody named Melvin Whitey Hull went to the house as he couldn't reach anybody by phone. When he showed up, he found everyone deceased, or what he thought was deceased. So he helped himself to anything he wanted to take from the house. And at this part in the book, there are 2 pages of maps with the layout of this house. I found that super, super cool and super helpful as a reader, that you can kind of see the outline of the house, because for the most part, I don't feel like a lot of books, or if you're listening to podcasts about this case, you don't really get that. But this took the time to be like, here's the layout, like in detail, which I thought was pretty cool. Rich says if they were smarter, they would have taken a different path in life. Well, Rich, I mean, I want to give you a star, but like realistically, I'd have to give you 100 stars for that comment, because that could be related to every single true crime case ever. But yeah, for this case, there are a lot of people that made a lot of bad choices. And if any of them went down different paths, the outcome would be just extraordinarily different. But yes, very well said, especially in this case. So now, same day, Wednesday, July 1st, 1981, late afternoon. So the neighbors who were moving, they had heard some slight moaning from next door, but they basically ignored it. By 4 p.m., 2 to 3 men ran out of the Wonderland house yelling, quote, "They are dead bodies in there," end quote. So the movers were now curious again. They had kind of heard moaning, ignored it. They went to look in. Immediately, they called police. So that was 4 p.m. Just after 4:20 p.m., police responders arrived. And it was about 5 p.m. when Tom Lange and Robert Souza got the call. So again, these are the lead detectives of this case and the ones who wrote this book. So everything before I kind of said was just kind of an outline leading up. Now they have picked up the case, so everything that we're going to read going forward, it's not written from like the firsthand perspective. It's kind of more an overall, like Tom during this part, or Robert during this part, but it's really them with the investigation as it's unfolding in real time, which I thought was really cool, because I feel like so many of us, it's such a well-known case, know the end result, but to kind of step back and put that all out of mind and to follow the case as it's unfolding for Tom and Robert. And not just that, it's going to be pretty clear, pretty quick who was involved. And we're going to talk about all of the barriers that's unfolding in real time to Tom and Robert, whether it's from the people who did the crime, whether it is people involved in law enforcement trying to, dare I say, cover it up, make it go away, so on and so forth. I mean, there's so much to this case, but the frustration and the emotions that are going to come from Robert and Tom as the book unfolds, we're going to get that in real time. And it's, yeah, you go along that emotional roller coaster with them, because it's very frustrating. But let's rewind. So again, 5 p.m., Tom and Robert get the call to go to the Wonderland house. So the homicide cop that was at the scene told, okay, let me pause. Throughout the book, at some points it will say Tom, as in Tom Lange, and then other times it will say Lange. Like, refer to him by first name, refer to him by last name, and then same thing with Robert Souza. Sometimes it will say Robert, sometimes it will say Souza. So if I typically like to stick with first names, but in this case, I kind of went with as the way the book was saying it. So if during the book you hear me, for example, refer to Tom as Tom or him as Lange, then that's why, because that's the way the book is doing it. But just so you know, again, Tom Lange, Robert Souza. Okay. So again, the homicide cop at the scene told Lange when he arrived, quote, Lange, it looks like someone walked through that house with buckets of blood and sloshed it everywhere, end quote. So right away as a reader, you're like, all right, what type of fucking scene are we about to get into? So the book then describes what it was like for Lange and Souza when they arrived and walked through the scene, including how the victims were found. It is given in great detail. Dare I say that was one of my favorite parts of the book. Not because it's so gruesome and graphic, but we've read so much about the scene. To step back and basically walk through it with them as they're finding it for the first time is such a different perspective. And I really, really liked that. I liked the acknowledgement of what they're seeing, and then in their minds, kind of what they're interpreting it as. And then they go to the next room and the next victims. There's so much happening so fast. I just loved it. There was a lot to process. And again, it was given in great detail. One of my favorite parts of the book. And again, we're just in the beginning few chapters of this book. And right away, your girl's hooked on it. Love it. So let's continue. So Susan was transported to the hospital. Again, she was the one that was moaning. She was still alive miraculously. However, it is estimated that she lost over 4 pints of blood. And I liked that the author gave the note, the average body has about 10 pints. I didn't know that. I knew she lost a lot of blood, but for them to be like, here's how much she lost, here's how much the average body has, I'm like, all right. Thank you for giving that detail. I didn't know that. Maybe some of you guys would know that reading it. I didn't, so I found that helpful. But it just goes to show how gruesome and how badly beaten she was because of the amount of blood that she lost. So in just over 2 hours, the entire crime scene with the bludgeoned bodies in place were captured on videotape, not only for investigative purposes, but also to be used in court. The camera captured the incredible violence brought against the victims and showed the reality of the relationship between those victims and much of the other evidence. And as it turned out, this was going to be groundbreaking because, as the back of the book said, this case would be the first time a videotape of the murder scene was admitted in court as evidence in the state of California. Huge. This is huge. And especially a case like this where it's, again, so gruesome, it's just wild. So, all right. Thursday, July 2nd, 1981, mid-morning. So now everything the detectives observed was documented in writing because, again, I feel like this is like this with so many careers. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So again, not only do they have the video evidence, it all has to be documented in writing. So the temperatures continue to rise outside. Again, this is July in California. Inside the house, it reached over 100 degrees. So this was the type of atmosphere that law enforcement was working in. And inside, investigators answered numerous calls that were being placed and coming into the house because they made the choice that it could have been a customer of the victims that was calling, it could have been an associate of the victims, and they needed more information. So that was very wise of them to do because that actually did help out with things down the road. So the coroner who performed the autopsies determined that the victims had basically been beaten and the ones that were deceased died in the early morning of July 1st. Again, that is something we know kind of because the book set that up, but this is something now that Tom and Robert are learning because now, again, the investigation is unfolding. So, Friday, July 3rd, 1981, tons of calls were coming into the police station. Some were from media and some were prank calls. So, David Clay Lind, he had broken into the house. Um, Again, like, stay stupid, stay stupid. The murders had occurred and he's gonna break in. Do you not think it's being monitored by law enforcement? Okay. But anyway, police came. They there were drugs. He was on the floor gathering up pills and tablets. And he was saying that he thought his quote old lady who was in the house was still alive. When police brought him to be interviewed and told him Barbara was dead, he flipped out. So this is now where we're learning that David Clay Lind was with Barbara. It was clear after learning that his quote old lady was deceased, he wanted to talk to police. He told police everyone in the house was doing drugs and dealing out of that house. They had been setting up robberies of dope dealers. They also dealt in stolen property. When police asked him who set up the murders, Lind very clearly, without a doubt, said, quote, John fucking Holmes and his sand dude gangster buddy, end quote. So again, that is a direct quote, and him saying John Holmes and his people are the ones that did the murders. So it was pretty clear right from the beginning that the police had to investigate John Holmes. So detectives, again, they now had people to interview about what happened in that house. So Chuck Negron, the lead singer of the group Three Dog Night, he was also interviewed, and that was discussed in this book in regards to if he knew John Holmes. Chuck was asked, again, do you know him? He said he did. He stated that Holmes was a porn actor who was regularly at Wonderland. Quote, he was always broke, end quote, and, quote, scheming to scam for cocaine, end quote. So Chuck elaborated, explaining that Holmes was a, quote, wannabe, end quote, and tried to act, quote, rough, end quote. Holmes was always bringing stolen items into the house, such as radios, television sets, and even guns. For Julia Negron's interview with police, she said she had gone by the Wonderland home and saw the front door ajar. So Evie the pit bull was loose, which was not quite normal. So she stepped into the home after knocking and observed the bloodied body of Barbara Richardson. She turned around quickly and fled. She stated that she had told a neighbor about her discovery and she just assumed the neighbor would call police. That didn't happen. It was decided that Souza and Lange would split up temporarily and divide the workload on this case. The important autopsies, they'd been scheduled, and it was critical for a member of the team to attend the post-mortem exams. And it was decided that Souza would basically stand the, quote, posts, end quote, while Lange tended to all other matters that were flooding into the office about this case. Much of the information that was coming in was time sensitive and in need of immediate attention. So at this point in the book, the autopsies are performed and reviewed, and the autopsies are discussed at length. Again, the autopsy information is stuff that you can see online or see in other Wonderland books, but which I have read before. However, I like it in this book because, again, it is from the perspective of the investigators who worked it, and they are learning about it in real time, describing it in real time, and it just has that more law enforcement perspective, so that more I hate to say professional perspective, but that's really what it is, professional perspective of the autopsies, where I feel like any other book just covering the case is just talking about the autopsies to talk about it. So I just found the tone very different, and I really liked it reading about it in this book versus some others that I've read before.
So the book discusses Susan. Okay, she was the one survivor and she was being examined at the hospital. And that examination is described in the book as well in detail. She was comatose when the basically examination was performed. And what I found was interesting, and I did not know this part until I read the book. The forensic pathologist who did the autopsies was also the same one who examined Susan. The doctor at the hospital was present for the examination. But I found that absolutely fascinating. And the book kind of goes into why they had the forensic pathologist do her examination. I don't know if that's something that's common. I know this case is unlike many other cases, but that was just one detail that really stuck with me. Even after I moved on several chapters down the road, I was like, wow, that's just a very interesting investigative approach that was done. Again, for all I know, it was protocol, but that's very different. So police were learning that the victim, so Susan, she had a long criminal history, and so did Ron. So now we go into Lange, Souza, and Deputy District Attorney Ronald Cohen. They received information about the last person who had went to Ed Nash's home and purchased drugs. Since the Wonderland house murders had just occurred and there was interest in that house, when asked they wanted to be a part of the search warrant that was going to be happening at Ed Nash's house, do they want to get in? They jumped at that opportunity. So I know I just kind of literally and figuratively jumped ahead a little bit. Police are getting information, and they talk about it in this book, about Ed Nash and how the connections are to this case. Again, they already got the name John Holmes. So the name Ed Nash is being brought in. And yes, where another officer is going to be doing a search warrant, it's kind of like, hey, we know you guys are investigating this other case. It's most likely tied. Do you want in on this? And they say yes. With that being said, I don't know if that would necessarily fly nowadays. It's very much, this is clearly out of my expertise, but I was reading that and I was like, huh, is that how that works? Is that how it's still done? Is that how it's always done? It was just very interesting, and I was just like, okay. But at the end of the day, they got in. They needed to get in. They jumped at it. So that warrant was executed July 10th, 1981. So detectives found legal documents stuffed under Nash's bed sheets. The thing is, those legal documents were confidential affidavits and LAPD intelligence reports. Nash clearly had a connection on the inside of the police department, and that was the person providing information to him. Now, those investigating this case did not know who that was at the time, but there's no other way he would have these documents. So it's kind of like one step ahead, 15 steps back, because Nash has people on the inside. So he's always going to be one step ahead, if not more steps ahead than the lead investigators, as we're going to come to learn. So the captain of the police department was, to put it bluntly, basically hindering the investigation to Tom and Robert interviewing Nash. And Tom and Robert were like, what the hell? Like, what the hell? So they actually tried to go above their supervisor's head, and they got the same result. And in the book, they're pissed and they're questioning why. This does not make any sense. This is the way the investigation's going, and we're being told to not interview the suspect in this. And then we go above, and they're saying the same thing. Why? This is the same person that we want to interview who has confidential law enforcement documents stuffed under his sheets. why? And as a reader, I'm following along and I'm feeling the frustration of Tom and Robert. I am just like they are busting their ass to try to solve this case. And Ed Nash is not a good person. Not a good person. Putting aside the Wonderland murders, just putting that aside, Ed Nash is not a good guy. And that is well known. And it's just so frustrating because you have two detectives that are just trying to do their job. And especially one where such a horrific, gruesome murder happens and they're being blocked. Every turn they go, they're being blocked. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. But let's carry on. So Tom and Robert continued on with the investigation and interviewed Tracy Ray McCord about what was going on at the Wonderland house. He was in jail for grand theft, and Tracy did give up a few names, and one of those names was John Holmes. So July 12th, 1981, John Holmes was picked up by police at a motel. Tom and Robert jumped at this opportunity to speak with him. So Tom and Robert learned that John was being guarded by LAPD Metro Division there, along with his girlfriend and his wife. Yes, if you do not know the case, John Holmes had a wife and he had a girlfriend. And not only was he being guarded by LAPD, he was being given food by them. He was even given liquor by them. One example is very expensive scotch. The idea was that the more comfortable John was, the more he would open up. Tom and Robert were pissed. They were pissed that this was allowed to happen. And it became very, very clear that John Holmes was milking this for all it was worth. And to be honest, why not? I mean, he has police in the palm of his hands. He's not a good dude and did a lot of shitty things. And this is his time to just kind of milk it with everything and basically make the police look like fools and being like, yeah, you're going to treat me good because I have something you want. It's just shitty. I get it. I get it. Police need to work with informant. I get it. But this was a very extreme example. Hello, Chris James. Long time no see. Good book, Danny. Chris, have you read the book? If so, please comment. I would like to know your thoughts on it. Hello, K-Dog. They knew exactly who did it, but couldn't convict. The court didn't care about the victim. Seems like a sloppy prosecution with not a lot of effort. K-Dog, that is very, very well said. And that's one of the things that as the book unfolds, the reader does learn that as well. There were a lot of roadblocks in trying to get conviction against Holmes and Nash. And we'll go through that. And you're right. And because of who the victims are, I mean, obviously the authors don't say that played a part in this, in regards to the way that they were blocked by other law enforcement officers. But I will say Tom and Robert, in writing this book, you really know and get the vibe that right away they want to solve this case and they want to do it right and get it done, but they're being blocked on so many avenues. And yeah, if the victims were a different type of victim, would that play a part? Or because of who Ed Nash was, would it not matter at all? Because he had police basically, wrapped around his finger and basically owned them, so to speak. Cop blocking. I mean, that's what I'm referring it as it to. I mean, to call it like it is. They're being blocked by, by their supervisors, the supervisors. It's crazy. And I mean, this is LAPD. Is this the first time this happened? That happened? No. Is it going to be the last time that happened? No. Before anybody says, why are you coming down on LAPD? I'm from Boston. Our Mass State Police is just very, very fucked anyway. So like, trust me, I'm not cop shaming. Like, we got it bad here right now in Massachusetts. Chris James, yes, great book. There's a great podcast on it with Tom Lange, but I can't remember the name of it. Do a YouTube search if interested. Thank you, Chris. I'm actually gonna give that a star, so that people can see that there is a podcast on it, and quickly look that up. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you enjoyed the book. So as I'm going through this, if there's anything that you want to add as I'm doing it, feel free to be like, Danny, don't forget this. Danny, don't forget that, so on and so forth. But that's awesome. You read the book. That's cool. Okay. So again, John Holmes was being treated like royalty by LAPD. Well, after 5 days, things kind of started to fall apart. Sharon, his wife, left, and John was released to deal with his grand theft auto charges. That is finally when John spoke to police. So he began his so-called admission by alluding to complicity in the robbery of Ed Nash. He stated that he drew a diagram of the Nash residence for the Wonderland bunch and left a rear sliding glass door unlocked for them to enter at Ed Nash's. John admitted to receiving more than $2,000 in cash and some cocaine as his take in the robbery. He discussed his relationship with Ed Nash further, stating he also scored cocaine from him at the home and fenced stolen property there from time to time. Regarding the murders themselves at Wonderland, John claimed he had been coerced into leaving the front door of the Wonderland house unlocked on the morning of the murders. All right, Beckham, what are you saying? I've met someone that was close to Nash for a time. Of course you have, Beckham, but no, I know that this is, yeah. We've talked. But thank you for sharing that with everyone. So detectives at this point, they had been monitoring Ed Nash's place, and they were making note of every single car coming and going in regards to every license plate that would visit that house. November 8th, 1981, a call came on about a dead body at Nash's home. It was the body of 26-year-old Dominic Fragamelli. He was an employee of Nash, and he was also a heroin addict. November 25th, 1981, the day before Thanksgiving, the police had a search warrant that they were going to be executing at Nash's. So Lange and Souza, they wanted to get close to the pornography and organized crime groups due to Holmes and Nash's tie to them. For those who don't know, John Holmes was a porn actor. I feel like it's like kind of sprinkled in throughout the book. I think I'm just taking for granted that everybody knows that. So that's on me for if somebody who's not familiar with this case as I'm doing the review. When earlier in the book, when it talks about who's John Holmes, it discusses at that point that he is a porn actor. So again, due to Holmes and Nash's ties to the porn and organized crime groups, Tom, Lange, and Robert Souza want to get close to those groups. They wanted to speak to the confidential informants that were tied to those groups. So they wanted to speak to specifically Detective Tom Lange. He was the one who handled John Holmes. Once again, wouldn't you know, Lange and Souza were getting blocked. And they weren't getting the cooperation from law enforcement that they really should have for this case. Boogie Nights. James, you are correct. You are correct. I don't know either way, Brian. I don't know. Okay, so the media at this point, they got wind that John Holmes may be a suspect in the murders. And the way they got that information was because that information was leaked from somebody on the inside. So remember earlier when I read those little points on the back cover and it talked about how in the mind of cops is there's a federal agent out there working hard to derail their murder investigation. Yeah. There are always questions when the investigators are investigated by their own. Yeah. A lot of that here. A lot of that. Yes. Yes. Same Tom Lange. That is talked about later in the book. I actually didn't get into that into my notes, but Brian, since you mention it now, I'll mention it. At the very, very end of the book, it goes into a little bit of what Tom Lange and Robert Souza kind of did for some other investigations that they did during their careers. Some are discussed like in the intermediary between really justice being done for John Holmes and, if you want to call it justice, and Ed Nash, because obviously they had to work some other cases in between. So those were discussed a little bit. I didn't really get into that into my notes. I really just focused on the book and the crimes here itself. And then at the end, it also talks about a little bit more of the cases that they're well known for. But yep, that was one of them. So thank you. Okay. So Lange and Souza were waiting for information on John Holmes' whereabouts, and they hadn't heard from their detective, Tom Blake. Again, Blake was basically just not being cooperative with them. So they decided to put out an NCIC, which is a nationwide warrant for charges of grand theft and receiving stolen property against John Holmes. The law enforcement officials also went out to speak with John Holmes' wife, Sharon, because their thought was he might contact her, and she was very upfront with detectives. She didn't want any problems, and she told them, John actually has my vehicle. So they knew what vehicle to look for. Detectives also spoke with John's family. Dawn was John's girlfriend. Again, he had a girlfriend and he had a wife. And Dawn's family were super eager for John Holmes to be in custody because they wanted their daughter, their loved one, their family member home safe. And Dawn was with John. Wherever he was, Dawn was with him. So meanwhile, Susan was showing signs of recovery in the hospital. The doctors believed, she might be able to be interviewed. So law enforcement decided who would be the best one to interview her, what approach to take, and who would be the one to gain her trust. Lang seems like a nice down. Yeah, you 100% get that vibe reading that book. I mean, both of the law enforcement officers really do, to be honest, in my opinion. Everyone already knows this, but even by criminal code, Nash was very low a human being. Thank you, Beckham. Yeah. And if you don't know this case and you don't know Ed Nash and you're reading this book, you really get that as the book unfolds in regards to as Tom and Robert are learning more and more about this case, and especially more and more about Nash and all the stuff that he's involved in. It's very, very clear. I know. Yeah. No wonder that Dawn's family was so eager to be like, yeah, catch John. Like, we want our daughter home safe. Imagine. I mean, they know what John's into. They don't want their daughter with him, but nonetheless, she is there. So now, on November 30th, 1981, law enforcement learned that John Holmes and Dawn were in Miami, Florida. So they hopped a plane. They went down there. So Dawn's sister, who was Dawn's brother was cooperating with law enforcement and flew there to actually help law enforcement find his sister, and his name was Wayne. The law enforcement there in Miami. So not only are Tom and Robert like really not getting help from their own law enforcement brothers, but the ones in Miami were overall less than helpful as well. However, thank God there were actually some officers there that were actually very willing to be of assistance and willing to take the time to help them. So the book talks about that, talks about all of the people that they go through and the places they visit in Miami, Florida to try to locate John Holmes. They do a lot of police surveillance and they locate Dawn. So by locating Dawn, they locate John. When police finally got the opportunity to talk to John Holmes, he did provide some corroborating information. However, he refused to say that Nash was involved at all in the Wonderland killings. He also said he feared for his safety and his family's safety. So right away, law enforcement's like, okay, he's not going to roll over on Nash, but he's also saying he's concerned for his family. So detectives, I mean, they know Nash, right? We're going to learn a lot more shady shit that Nash does, but they know that you don't fuck with Nash. And John is very much afraid of him. Regardless, after this interview, John was arrested for the 4 murders and the attempted murder of Susan. And yeah, again, if you're not familiar with this case and you're reading it, you're just like, okay, they are going to put it on him and put it on him probably in the hopes that he's going to actually be like, you know what, I'm not going down for this. I'll say who is also involved. Denjay90, hello, welcome. Hope you're doing well. So now John Holmes goes on trial. And he actually had some very well experienced defense attorneys. He also had Frank Tomlinson, who is now retired from the Los Angeles Police Department. He testified at trial, remaining firm in his belief that John did not actually kill anyone. Think about that. Think about that. A retired, at the time, Los Angeles Police Department officer took the stand and said he remained firm in his belief that John did not do the killings. He did not actually kill anyone. How do you think the jury's gonna take to that? I mean, one of law enforcement officers' own. So, when detectives identified the 2 other men who went into the Wonderland home and discovered the bodies but did not call police, they were interviewed. And those were Melvin Hall and James Address. So if you're saying, wait a minute, Danny, why did you just jump? The book jumps. The book jumps. It's going to go back. But bear with me. Y'all know I go in chronological order. So stay with me. I know I just left you on a cliffhanger for those who do not know this case. So Melvin told the police he went to the home to pick up Ron, but he found the front door open and discovered the bodies. He was honest with the detective, saying, like, if anything too honest, saying, yeah, I stepped over the body of Susan and I heard her moan. The police flat out said to him, why didn't you do anything? And he said, because of her critical condition, she was going to die anyway. Quote, why attract attention, end quote. Vicious. That is savage. So this, I think he realizes he looks like an asshole, like a big time asshole. So in a pathetic attempt to justify his actions, he said, well, I told neighbors about the bodies on my way out the front door. Like, really? Okay, now you're the hero? Like, come on. I love how you guys are so interactive in the chat about this case. Unless the killers forced him to hit someone with the pipes, so he got his hands dirty, I doubt Holmes willingly killed anyone. Well said. Oh, this is the case they made a movie about. I need to watch this one. You've planted a seed. Yes! This is that case. And I literally know nothing about. Oh my God. You're like the person right now that I'm just like, oh my God. I want to teach you everything about this case. And I'm not just saying this because I'm reviewing the book and actually loved it, but like, if you're gonna get a book, forget the one that from the law enforcement officers that wrote it, that wrote it and that investigated it. And then from there's a million other good books out there. But like this book. Yeah. Star him, Danny. Holmes hit a few people with pipe all right. K-Dog, calm down. It's not the weekend yet. All right. Let's keep going. Because we have somebody that doesn't know the case. We got to keep going. All right. So, police also met with somebody named Dorothy Glickman. She was a regular that was coming and going from Nash's residence. And her husband was a longtime business acquaintance of Nash, Hal Glickman, and he was a jail bondsman. Keep that in the back of your mind because he's going to come up again. So Dorothy had told the detective she was now clean from drugs, and she believed that Nash was the most evil person who had ever lived. But she also did not have information that would put him as a suspect in the murders. The morning of the murders, she said she had breakfast with John Holmes. He was nervous. He was kind of all shaken up, but he didn't say anything in particular with her about anything that happened at Wonderland. So the book now transitions to Robert Souza, and he was the one that was decided to be the main point person who would go visit Susan at the hospital. So one day he goes to visit. This was wild. Like when I read this, I was like, holy shit. Like the person that was at the incompetent, the person at the door. And let me say why. So Susan had security detail officers outside of her room at all times. Think about it. Everybody in that house was brutally murdered and she was brutally attacked and she miraculously survived. So they needed her on guard 24/7 so no one could get to her, right? So Robert goes one day and the officer outside the door says, "Oh, Susan is a guest with her." So Robert says, "Okay, who is it?" And he's like, "I don't know. I didn't identify the visitor." What the fuck? So Souza rushes into the room and he finds a man lying in the hospital bed with Susan. They were laughing. They were getting along. And the thing is, Robert made note that Susan was definitely way more lively, way more, I don't want to say chatty, but engaged than she had been in any interview that she had done with him. So Robert pulled this guy out of the room and interviewed him. His name was Larry Martin Hirschman. He was known as Cherokee. He willingly told Souza he had scored drugs at the Wonderland home for about 18 months. And he willingly went with police to do an interview down at the station. And it is there where police learned he had a long history too of robbery. And he had done some actually pretty freaking hard time in prison. So remember how I said that Susan noticed she and Susan was a bit more engaged with Cherokee than she had been with him in any of these other interviews. He couldn't help but wonder, was Susan faking it? Meaning this whole like meek, like really not being super cooperative with Souza, but here she was with Cherokee being very different. So the book actually describes that Souza thought she was, quote, perhaps playing possum, end quote. So Souza had excused himself with Cherokee. And when he observed Susan in that moment, he says she sat there silent, holding a smug grin. When Souza went back later that day to spend time with Susan, she told him that she had known Cherokee and was friends with him for years and that she thought he was, quote, really cute, end quote. Interesting, right? So soon after this, Susan's condition improved and she was released from the hospital. She was transferred to a rehab hospital where she would be housed in the major head trauma clinic. She was actually going to be restricted to a wheelchair and a hospital bed. And then the book goes over a bit more of the conversations that Souza had with her in more detail. Let's see. You are saying, Ginger Nettie, I was just about to say this case had to do with drugs. Then you said, oh, once again, big Cielo vibes. Yeah, there's a lot of connections that people have made to the Wonderland murders and the Cielo Drive murders. Actually, George Stimson on his Goodbye Helter Skelter YouTube page actually has a video specifically about the kind of yes, Cielo Drive, Sharon Tate murders, the breakdown in kind of similarities and then the differences between Wonderland and Cielo Drive. James. All right. So even though Susan was now going to be transferred to a new place, she was still going to be meeting with Souza to talk with him. And over time, she began to open up more about some of the incidents involving her and her husband. Again, her husband is deceased because he was brutally beaten at the Wonderland house. On one occasion, she ended a response saying, quote, anyway, that's what I was telling your buddy, end quote. And Souza was like very caught off guard. Like that statement was just totally in passing, but he's just like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Because Souza was the only officer that was authorized to speak with Susan. Nobody else was. You know how I mentioned that there was going to be a law enforcement officer 24/7 guarding her door? They couldn't even speak to her. So Souza was the only one authorized. So he was confused and just flat out said, what do you mean? And she says, well, the other cop, the one here on security. So Souza was pissed. He pressed the officer, Jim Pearson, about this. And he responded, and get this. He says, well, I'm writing a book on the case, and I believe Susan has a compelling story to tell. And then he goes on to say to Souza, I'd actually even like to talk to you about this case to put in my book. All I have right here are a ton of like asterisks and like almost like my keyboard was like, what the fuck? Like Souza at this point in the book is pissed. And as a reader, you feel that. You feel how angry. The nerve. Like, again, stay stupid. I'm glad this officer didn't lie and try to say, no, it wasn't me, but like, the nerve. Yeah, she's got a story to tell. You know what? I'd even like to interview you too for my book. Really? There's a note in here. Yeah, the book. There was no book in the end. No book ever really came out. So like, you got fired right away. Was it worth it? Jim Pearson, was it worth it? So, I'm just looking at you guys in the comments. Different type of land. So needless to say, of course, he got pulled off detail and was told to stay away from the witness. Again, stay stupid. Officer Pearson, he showed up again and tried to interview Susan again. Like, the nerve. It was one of those, like, on the one hand, I'm feeling how angry Souza is at this point in the book, but I'm also just like, almost like having that emotional moment of just like, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck is wrong with people? Like, I needed that break because I feel like as I'm reading this, it's just like so intense and you're like feeling the emotions the investigators are feeling. And this point comes and you just have to stop and go, what the hell? So I actually welcomed that kind of break in emotion as I was reading it, but that's just me. All right. So the book then made a note. All right, all right. So let's tie up Officer Jim Pearson in a pretty little bow here and send him on his way and not deal with him again. So the book makes the extra note. And okay, I will say, pause, there's a lot of notes that are at the end of paragraphs and stuff throughout the book. Some are like maybe a couple of sentences. Let me see if you can see here. That's kind of hard to pick up. Some are a paragraph, some are a few paragraphs, but I feel like if not every page, almost every page has like an extra little note, so to speak. Some of the time they were helpful. A lot of the time I felt, to be perfectly honest, it gave just like more information that I didn't really feel as the reader was needed. So with that being said, some of it was, I felt really good information. So you know what? I'll take the extra stuff, even though some I'm like, read it. Okay, I can put it aside. I don't really need that to follow along with the story. Because some of it just kind of goes off into little side tangents that are like semi-connected that I feel like, yes, the authors are trying to give more to the reader. I didn't necessarily always need that more. So that's just me. Take that as you will. However, again, now this little side tangent of Officer Jim Pearson, if nothing else, thank you, Tom and Robert, for putting it in this book. Thank you. Because let's just see this asshole out the way he is supposed to be. So that extra note in the book is Officer Pearson was later working security detail at the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles. He had discovered an explosive device on one of the Olympic team buses. He was hailed a hero for saving the day. All right, now let's get the real story. It was later discovered he was the one who planted the bomb to make himself look like the hero. So he was fired from LAPD. See ya. See ya. Like, what an asshole. What an asshole. Again, thank you, Tom and Robert, for putting that in there. Like, it makes total sense to who that guy was. But like, wow. Not gonna lie, after I read that chapter and read that note, a little part of me was like, I want to research what happened to him since that firing. Where did his life take him? But then I was like, Danny, do you really want to go down that rabbit hole? And a part of me is still like, because somebody like him isn't just going to be like, oh my God, I really fucked up and I need to turn my life around. No, someone like that's just going to keep going the way they're going. So a little part of me is still like, Danny, do some investigative work. See where his life took him. But then the other part of me is just like, Danny, there's only 24 hours in a day. Do you really want to spend it researching this asshole? Decisions. I'm still not decided. Oh, that would be too good for him. That would be too good for him. A little bit. Oh, thank you. Hi, PJ Wolf. The book had good friends. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. I know I'm going a little rant about this guy, but like, come on. Like, this was the bullshit that Tom Lange and Robert Souza had to put up with. Imagine, this guy, seriously, this was one of the bumps in the road. That sucks. You know what, James Watson, I'm going to give you a star on that one. I have no words. All right, let's keep going. So So Lange and Souza interviewed Hal Glickman. So remember I said keep that name in the back of your mind. That was Dorothy Glickman's husband. He told police he was upset with his now former wife Dorothy for taking up with Nash while he was in prison. He also told law enforcement that she stole about $200,000 from his bail bond business while he was in prison. Again, that is not $200,000 2026 money. That is $200,000 1980s money. Big difference. He became agitated and told them he couldn't care less about the murder investigation. He did not want anything to happen that would interfere with any, quote, business relationship, end quote, he might have had with Nash. After all, business was business. Think about that. Dorothy took up with Nash while he was in prison. She stole from him, so on and so forth. And even though this is the guy his wife took up with, he still didn't want any interference with his business relationship with Nash. So it's like, it's very interesting. And as the law enforcement and book goes on, you really, if you're not familiar with Nash and who he is, like you really see like this guy's like a spider who has his web just, it's spread out in a million different pieces and he's connected to so many people. Like, again, I couldn't even get into all of that in this book review because it would just, there's just so many people. But I'm just giving like the basic details of the people that are being described here. But it's in the book, it's described in way more detail. So, in 1982, Nash was under federal indictment. He was charged with arson and racketeering, and he was awaiting trial at this point. So while that is, again, awaiting trial, the police now focus on Gregory Diles. And now is the time for a probable cause of arrest. And the thing is, they described that they were taking a gamble with this arrest. They were hoping that Greg would be a weasel, kind of like John Holmes was. John Holmes was, again, now facing murder charges in his trial and would do anything to save his ass. So again, remember earlier how John Holmes was like not really wanting to go over on Ed Nash? Well, John Holmes is all about John Holmes, and ultimately he does not want to go down for the murders. And they were kind of hoping that Gregory Diles would kind of do the same thing. However, when pulled in by police, Greg refused to say anything, and he was released after the weekend. So, again, that was a gamble that police knew they were taking. In March 1982, Greg was sentenced to 3 years in state prison for assault on a Los Angeles Sheriff's SEB unit during the July 1981 search warrant at Nash's residence. So they at least got him in jail for a little bit. Susan was, again, the lone survivor finishing rehabilitation, and she was soon going to be able to leave. And when she was able to leave, she went to stay with her parents. So away from her life at the Wonderland house and away from like the people she was connected to at that time. So, May 18th, 1982, several years worth of work by the U.S. Attorney's Organized Crime Strike Force resulted in the arson and fraud trial of Ed Nash. So if you're thinking, Jenny, you're kind of jumping back and forth between, charges and search warrants with Ed Nash and then John Holmes and his trial and back to Ed Nash. That, yes, I am, because that's kind of the way everything kind of happened as it went. Things were just back and forth all over the place. While one thing was happening, another thing was happening over here, and then back to this, and now a little more over. It's a lot. I'm quickly jumping through it in my notes, but please know the book really takes the time to break down where everything is happening as it's laying out. So, but yeah, there is a lot of jumping around and back and forth because that's just how it laid out. Again, going after Holmes, going after Nash. A lot of moving parts here. A lot of moving parts. So, along with 3 others, the U.S. Department of Justice tried to show that they were part of an organized arson ring. So, again, Nash and 3 other people. During the trial, Nash appeared completely disinterested. Completely disinterested. And it was noted that he would actually nod off on several occasions. So, with that being said, if this was any other trial, an attorney would be like, dude, like, what the fuck are you doing? You're looking bad. This is not going to play well for the jury, so on and so forth. We don't know the behind the scenes conversations between Nash and his attorneys. So I will say that. I was not there. I was not born in 82. I was not alive yet. But I think we can all confidently say that the amount of ties and connections, again, Nash was like a spider that just had webs going out and touching and connecting to everyone and holding power over so many people. He was disinterested. He was nodding off. Like, that was his nap time while the trial was unfolding. So a jury saw that. He clearly did not care, because deep down he knew it'll be fine. It will be fine, because with Nash, there might have been hiccups along the road here and there, but for the most part, it was always just fine. And as a reader, I'm reading this and I'm just like, he couldn't even fake it. He couldn't even fake it in court. Dozed off, disinterested. Like, it's just appalling. It's appalling. And think about it. That is what Tom, Lange, and Robert Souza had to deal with. Just one of the little pieces that they had to deal with. So, okay. Lange said on the stand, because again, he took the stand during that trial, quote, "When a crime occurs in hell, you don't have angels as witnesses," end quote. And this stuck with the jury. And again, that was the quote on the back of the book. That stuck with me. Like, what an incredible quote for the case that this was. Did it stick with the jury? Yes. But sadly, it didn't make a big factor, because Ed Nash was acquitted of all of the charges. However, the 3 other men that were also part of this organized arson ring, they were all convicted on all of the charges. What did I say earlier? Ed Nash was disinterested. He was dozing off. He knew it would be okay. And it turned out it was. It's despicable. It's despicable. But now, meanwhile, June 3rd, 1982, the trial of John Holmes for murder began. The trial was the first time a videotape of the crime scene had been admitted as evidence in a murder trial in the state of California. So that was discussed in the book. The discussion of the palm print found at the scene that belonged to John Holmes, that was discussed. Again, it was lifted from a position that was consistent with someone bracing himself with his left hand on the bed railing as he beat down on the head of Ron. So Susan, she was at the trial to give testimony. Again, her husband, Ron, was murdered at this home. It was clear, though, that she wanted to remove herself from the entire Los Angeles scene. Holmes's defense attorney did not call any witnesses to the stand. Again, which you can look at it either way. Per our justice system, the burden of proof is on the state and the prosecution. The defense does not need to prove anything to the jury. It's the prosecution's job. So, but I did find it interesting that they didn't call any witnesses. Who would they have called, to be fair? But they didn't call any witnesses. So, in this trial, for those who do not know, Holmes was acquitted of the murders. The jury actually said they believed Nash should have been the one on trial for those murders. So shortly after the trial, John was served with a subpoena to testify to what he knew about the Laurel Canyon murders, the Wonderland murders. but John refused to comply, so he was jailed. Eventually, Holmes said, okay, I'll agree to testify. But when he did, it came with complete and total contradictions. So, at this point in the book, there is a page with a list of cases of serial killers in the greater Los Angeles area. And the way it's broken down is, for example, it will say Manson murders, the Night Stalker, and then the name of the person and the number of victims. So it's like a whole page that kind of breaks that down in sections and columns. So I'll just say who they are because it talks about it in the book, but I won't get into any of the details. The Manson murders, the Trash Bag Killer, the Hillside Stranglers, the Skid Row Stabber, the Freeway Strangler, the Toolbox Killers, the Sunset Strip Killers, the Old Lady Killer, the Night Stalker, the Skid Row Slayer, the Koreatown Slasher, the West Side Rapist Killer, the South Side Slayers, and the Grim Sleeper. The book discussed a few of those a little bit in detail, but not all of them. After John Holmes was found not guilty, Souza and Lange temporarily split to work on other cases. And this goes back to Brian's comment earlier that I briefly touched upon. Because, yes, they're still working the Wonderland murders, but other crimes are happening. So they need to address those. So they were, again, split to kind of work on those respective cases as they were happening. But again, still working on the Wonderland murder case as well. Thank you, Karen. So Ed Nash, he was now facing trial on the warrants of drug charges. One day during break, while Lange and Souza were down at the end of the hall sitting in the court, so the word I'm looking for, not the courtroom, courthouse. Ed Nash saw them and approached them. He was with his attorney and walked away from his attorney to approach them. I'm sure his attorney was like, what the fuck are you doing? So Ed Nash flat out said to Lange and Souza, what do you want with me? Because he knew that these two officers, they were homicide detectives. They weren't dope cops, and he was used to dealing with dope cops. They did not respond to him. Nash asked what they wanted to make it go away, and he offered $500,000. Again, not 2026 worth of $500,000, 1980s, early 80s, $500,000. Nash's attorneys were not happy that their client just tried to solicit two cops in a courthouse in front of them. This was clear to Lange and Souza how far that Nash was willing to go to get whatever he wanted. Based on the amount of people that Nash had like working, I would say wrapped around his finger, if you will, behind the scenes that were in law enforcement, I'm sure a lot of them would have taken that offer. But Lange and Souza were like, no, absolutely not. So Lange and Souza on lunch break, they went to the prosecutor and told him about this offer. And then there was a lot of talk about, what do we do with this? Because it's just their word against Ed Nash's. If they, let's say this was one of the things they talked about. If Souza and Lange, let's say they wired up and approached the conversation again with Nash to get him on audio about this deal, Nash's attorneys would very easily be able to flip it and be like, they solicited my client. So in the end, it was decided, like, we're not going to do anything with this. Let's just keep this in the back of our mind, but we're not going to do anything with this. But, like, imagine, like, Nash was just so confident to be like, what do you want? Here, make it go away. Like, wild. So Nash, however, his luck was starting to run out. On October 6, 1982, Nash was convicted on 7 counts of illegal possession of a controlled substance for sale. Nash called the prosecutor from jail and said he wanted to speak about the Wonderland murders. So the prosecutor met with Nash. Typical, like narcissistic personality. Nash began to complain about the predicament he was in. And so the prosecutor's like, why am I here? You said you had information. You're bitching about your conditions. Why am I here? And that's when Nash says, okay. David Lind was involved in the murders. So I heard, but I don't have any proof. That was really not a lot for the prosecutor to do at that time, because again, it's just hearsay. So again, the convicted of 7 counts of illegal possession of a controlled substance. He didn't have his sentence yet. November 22nd, 1982, so like a month and a half later, he finally gets his sentence. And Nash was sentenced to 8 years. That was the maximum sentence, and he was fined over $100,000. If you think, great, he's in jail, this must be where things kind of make it a little easier for detectives. Not even close. So if Nash's lawyer was standing there and witnessed it, I guess he could have been forced. Well, Nash walked away from him and like approached Lange and Souza. The book doesn't say like how close the attorney was. I'm guessing Nash said to his attorney after. Like, it doesn't give that play-by-play. But I'm also thinking that this was not the first time Nash did that either. But, yeah. So again, keep in mind, even though Nash was now away in prison, Tom and Robert were still working the Wonderland case murder. So they thought this would be a great time to go back and revisit and speak to some of the key players in this case. Again, Nash is in jail, so they might be willing to maybe say something before that they weren't really comfortable saying prior. So, summer of 1983, one day, Lange and Souza, and then Souza's brother Bob, they find out they are all being investigated by ATF. The ATF thought that they were in cahoots with Ed Nash. So the book describes the whole meeting with ATF, Lange, and Souza. And like the timing of it is so freaking like obvious. It's like, okay, Nash is in jail. Maybe people are willing to say something. Let's do the next step to finally solve and close this case of the murders in the Wonderland house. And wouldn't you know, it's like, now, oh, no, we got to investigate them. Like, I cringe when I read it because it's just so freaking obvious that it's like the people that Nash has connected to him, it's just like, they go, oh, no, we got to stop it. It's, yeah. Anyway, so Lange and Souza later learned that a bunch of other cops were being brought, so their fellow cops, keep in mind, were brought into the investigation to discreetly check on their murder books for log entries, persons interviewed, dates and times of various activities, and overall to keep an eye on them. The investigation got information from also got that information on a detective, Al Gustato, who was a 30-year veteran with the LAPD. Al Gustato had a perfect record, and he was known for being one of the best supervisors in the department. And information is now coming in about him too. And this information is, well, Al is actually godfather of Nash's kids, so there's a conflict of interest. This allegation was completely untrue, but that really shook up Al Gustato because, like, could you almost 30 years, a 30-year veteran with the LAPD, one of the best supervisors there in the department, and like Nash and his people and his minions that do work in law enforcement don't give a fuck. And they're just like, we will take down any officer. Like, it's just, it's horrible and it's sad. And the sad thing is, this isn't unique to just this case, but it's like, there's just a lot of it in this case. So later on, the same allegation was pointed at Souza, saying that he was the godfather of Nash's kids. And this showed how the cops were being attacked for going after Nash, right? That's exactly what I just said. And it was happening over and over and over and more and more and more. So it was very, very clear. I mean, Tom and Robert, they knew, like, they're going after us for doing our job, going after this guy who clearly has a lot of inside ties. Like, and then it was happening more and more. Like, can you make it any more obvious? But it was happening, right? So the investigation into Souza, Lange, and Souza's brother, it ended up in a particular, there was a lot of peculiar accusations that basically were unable to be substantiated. So then it was just ended. They never got an apology. Nothing. It was like, oh, well, we can't prove it, so let's just stop. Like, what the fuck? Did it end there? It sure didn't. Then in the fall of 1983, while Souza and Lange were on vacation, Souza called Lange very early one morning. He had learned that they were targets of a special investigation of the chief of police office. They were now being accused of conspiring with organized crime figures to cover up the case against Nash. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. We're going to go, we as in like those who connected to Nash on the inside, who were like trying to like stop Tom and Robert from doing their job. You're going after Nash, and we don't like it, so we're going to make all these accusations to stop you. And that failed. So now we're actually going to do a complete 180, and here's how we're going to get you. We're going to accuse you of actually working with him and trying to cover up the case. Really? Really? Like, you know, the connections that Nash had were just on multiple levels here, because I feel like any of us here that we're here tonight, we're talking about this book, we're comprehending this. You're like, well, duh, this, like, it's so obvious and so stupid. And like, on the one hand, like, you have to take allegations and like say you like, we heard it, all right, and like, but come on. This is so ridiculous and so obvious. But yeah, and if you're wondering, wait, how did they find this out? So Souza had gone into the office while he was on vacation. This was unplanned. He went in to log a call that he had received the night before about the Wonderland case. Again, this is the 1980s, so logging things was very different back then than it is now. When he went in, he saw all the Wonderland files. They were missing. Again, paper files, back in the day, they were completely missing. So he went into his captain's office, and Captain Cobb told him the files were in the hands of 2 other detectives. They should not have been. This was not their case. So Souza's just like, what the fuck? In addition, their own people had been assigned along with the Administrative Vice Division to investigate Tom and Robert for corruption. And if you're saying, who would have said all this? So it turns out that Federal Agent Hoskins was the one that made up the accusations. He was an agent that was like briefly mentioned earlier in the book, like just so briefly earlier during the book. He was sucking up to Lange and sucking up to Souza, trying to get as much information about Nash in the case as he could. but he had no ties to it. So there was really no reason to be like, okay, yeah, let us spill every single detail about this case to you. No, no. Well, now he's back and he's making these accusations. It's just like, oh. So it turns out you're also tied to Nash, right? It's just like, it's crazy. So this would all be things that would be coming up during discovery and affect the criminal investigation in the Wonderland murders case. And they knew this. They knew this. So it's like, all right, we couldn't get Tom and Robert this way. So now we're going to say that they're in cahoots and they're trying to cover this up against Nash. Even if the higher ups deem it like, okay, well, this was a bullshit accusation. We investigated it and cleared it. Doesn't matter. Now that is discovery. So the defense can use that during their trial and say, well, wait a minute. These officers who did this case, they were under investigation. So it's just like all these people saying these accusations against Tom and Robert, they knew what they were doing. And it was all to benefit Nash. And it's just so fucked up. It is so fucked up. Like the amount, as if the job, okay, I know I sound so angry right now, but like as a reader at this point in the book, that's what I'm feeling. And it just goes to show how well this book was written, that it like draws you in to be like, they're pissed. And I'm pissed with them. And I'm pissed for them. They are two detectives trying to do their job. Trying to do the right thing. They are not corrupt. Would it have been easy to take $500,000 in 1981, 1982 money from Nash and be on their way and be like, let's make this go? That would have been the easy thing to do. But no. They're ethical and they do their job the right way, the way it's supposed to be done to protect and serve the public. So not only are they facing all the troubles of, the players involved in this investigation, and just the barriers that come with that outside of the police station, they have to deal with the barriers and roadblocks that they're facing from their own fellow officers who are literally in cahoots with Nash and his people. And then there's it's just level after level after level, and they're just there to solve the damn case. It's horrific. It is horrific. Seriously. All right, let me calm down and let's get to the book. We're moving along here, folks. We're moving along. We're getting there. So, all right, when Lange and Souza returned back to work from vacation, they consulted with their department union and retained legal counsel going forward. And in the end, again, all of these accusations were unfounded. Souza and Lange, again, never received an apology. It was clear that Federal Agent Hoskins had been disrupting the Wonderland investigation. It was just like, it was suspected, but then it was made very crystal clear, like, all right, here's what his true intentions were. So when Souza and Lange met with their attorneys waiting to go after Hoskins for defamation of character and damaging their careers, this sucks. They were told all federal agents had immunity when engaging in official duties. So the fact that Hoskins could make this wild accusation to purposely fuck with Souza and Lange and do it under the umbrella of, well, it's part of an investigation. He had immunity. Could not be touched. Like, that's horrific. Horrific. So, ironically, years after Lange was approached by agents with the Internal Affairs Office from the ATF. And it turns out the ATF were investigating one of their own employees and they wanted Lange's assistance. Who was that employee? Hoskins. And Lange was more than happy to tell them everything. Well, soon after that, coincidentally, wouldn't you know it, Hoskins resigned from his position with the ATF. You know, it's one of those resign before you get fired type of things. But wouldn't you know that he later obtained a California private investigator's license, and his new business was at a club in Hollywood. And that club in Hollywood, guess who it was owned by? Nash and Hal Glickman. Hi, Steve. 100%. I'm giving that a star. 100%. So, a judge had now, so keep in mind, Nash is still in jail. While all this is going on behind the scenes, Nash is still in jail. Well, that judge decided to resentence, and we're going to get a little bit into this. It's like out of the blue. Resentence Nash's 8-year sentence to 4 years after Nash's attorney said he needed nasal surgery. Then only 2 years into the now 4-year sentence, Nash was released. So it went from 8 years to, okay, fine, just do 4 years. But then 2 years and they're like, you know what, just go out and leave. And wouldn't you know it, he never got nasal surgery. Shocking, right? The judge who resentenced Nash ended up, wouldn't you know it, resigning from the bench. He had a cocaine addiction and was arrested for petty theft. This judge was accused of being paid $100,000 for the prison sentence reduction for Nash. The accuser was Nash's business partner, Hal Glickman. It's just like everyone is connected. Like, I feel like my analogy of like Nash being a spider with the web and just, it's just like, I don't know what other analogy like to me is like better fitting than that, but nonetheless. But it's like the nerve of Hal Glickman to just be like, to be the one to accuse it. Yeah. You make a deal with the devil, you know? So anyway, late in 1985, Souza refuses a case that is handed to him. And he walks out. He walks out of the job and is just like, I am done. And he also noticed at the time something was off, like physically something was just off with him. So he went to his doctor and they said his blood pressure was extremely high. Soon after, his cardiologist ordered him officially off duty to alleviate stress and to control his blood pressure. So Souza never returned to the job again. This departure was actually really good for him. He lost 40 pounds, his blood pressure returned back to normal, and life was good. It was just good. He did stay busy. He shifted from kind of one pursuit to another. So like when he never really fully retired, so to speak. Again, he didn't go back to the job of law enforcement, but he just kept busy. He kept busy doing things and just leading a stress-free, healthy life. Meanwhile, John Holmes, he was fired from his manager for his job in the porn industry. He was not performing like the old John Holmes because of his drug use. John ended up marrying another porn actress, Misty Dawn. And at this point is when Ed Nash had been released from prison. So I know I mentioned a little earlier that he was released from that prison sentence early for getting nasal surgery, which he never got. It coincided with everything happening at this time as well. So it like touches upon it. And then it's like, here's also what's happening. And just so you know, it was at this time. So Lange, because now again, Souza's done. Lange now has a new partner working the Wonderland case, and they were able to keep an eye on John Holmes. And this is where they found out that, by his old manager, that John was actually very sick. He was in a hospital and that he had caught AIDS. And that was actually the wording that was in here, was that he had caught AIDS. Again, in the 80s, it was very different because it was still so new at that time. So again, they're warning he caught AIDS. So officers agreed that when they went to see John Holmes, they agreed that they had seen dead people that actually looked better than Holmes did at that time. He was emaciated. He had scraggly hair and beard. His face, hands, and arms exhibited various ulcerated splotches. He looked like he weighed not even 100 pounds at that point. John said he wanted to help detectives, but he needed to think things through first. He told the detective, "Come back, I'll have everything written down for you." But that never happened, because on March 13th, 1988, a few weeks after officers had visited John Holmes, he was now dead. He had died of AIDS. So mid-1988, Scott Thorson was now in jail and wanted to talk to police about what he knew about the Wonderland murders. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, that name, Danny, how do we know that name? I'm glad you ask. That is the quote that's at the very back page of the book that we read at the beginning of this episode. It was from trial testimony that Ed Nash said to Scott Thorson, quote, "People have a habit of disappearing in the canyon. By the time they find you, Scott, I'll have every tooth in your head pulled so they can't even identify you," end quote. So that's Scott Thorson. So again, he was now in jail and wanted to tell police what he knew about the Wonderland murders. So Scott, we learn a bit about him in the book. To put it very briefly, the book goes more into it. Scott was Liberace's gay boyfriend, who investigators had actually interviewed way earlier on. Scott had been heavily dependent on Ed Nash to support his drug habit. And Liberace had this thing where none of his partners could use drugs. Like, it was a no-no. And when Scott not only was using drugs, but became addicted and dependent on it, Liberace was like, "No, you gotta go." So that was that. Back then, Scott didn't want to talk to police about what he knew about the Wonderland murders and Ed Nash's connection, but he's saying, you know what, now I do. Now I want to tell you everything. What he told police was that at Nash's the night of the Wonderland murders, Greg Dials had brought John about the robbery. Holmes cried, admitted, saying, you know, "I'm the one that set up the robbery of your house." Scott was put in another room and he overheard yelling and heard, quote, "I want you to kill them all," end quote. So again, Scott is basically laying out like, I heard Holmes admitting to the robbery at your place, setting you up, and the working out that like Holmes were going to use you to set up the murders at the Wonderland house. So there had been some progress now in the Wonderland case. Finally, the DAs felt now was the time to arrest Ed Nash and Greg Dials for the 4 murders and the 1 attempted murder. So they were arrested. Bail was denied for both of them. So again, this is now 1988. How many years have we been going through, like, 1 step ahead by the investigators, 10 steps back because of all the roadblocks they've been hitting? Finally, things are moving forward. They're in jail. Bail is denied for both of them. So February 6, 1989, both men plead not guilty. There would be 1 trial for both men, but they would have 2 juries, 1 for each of them. And right away, I'm thinking that is exactly what happened with the Menendez brothers, if you guys remember. They were tried together, but they each had their own jury. So the book goes into a lot of detail about this trial. I'm not going to spend the time going through it. We're already almost 2 hours in, but do know the book goes a lot into detail about it. And that was also one of my favorite parts about this book. Just heard a loud thud. Cat's gone into something. So, May 1990, the cases went to the jury to deliberate for Nash. One of the jurors refused, it's so frustrating, refused to discuss the evidence, and felt the prosecution witnesses were liars who were being given special favors by the state, and like refused any type of cooperation with the other jurors. So the judge declared a mistrial. For Dials, the jury was deadlocked, 10-2 for acquittal. So the judge declared a mistrial. It's like, oh, what the heck? So now the defense, so now it's up to, there's been mistrials. It's up to the state, the prosecution, if they're going to retry. So here we go. Here we go again. So the defense now tries to say that Paul Kelly committed the murders. The jury got that in their minds that, you know what, this was a possibility. So round two, let's do this again. January 17th, 1991, Ed Nash and Greg Dials, they were acquitted. Not a mistrial, they were acquitted. Like, oh my God. So now we are jumping ahead 5 years. So September 1996. This is 8 years after Bob Souza retired. That is finally when Tom Lange retired. And we learned a lot. We learned that Nash sued his attorney, Ed Rucker, claiming that Rucker had overcharged for his services when he was representing Nash. And the book points out, like, really? Nash, are you not aware that this guy worked his ass off to prevent you from going to prison, and now you're going to sue him to be like, he overcharged me? Really? Really? Because we could go into that, but that's another point. But that wasn't it for Nash, because he was later indicted for organized crime and corruption under the RICO Act, a 16-count indictment, including federal crimes for money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, to commit offenses against the United States. So law enforcement had learned that there was a financial bribe of one of the jury members in the Nash trial, the one that resulted in him being acquitted. This was now going to be brought up during Nash's new trial for the indictment and charges under RICO. So if you're thinking, okay, well, this is great, things are moving forward with Nash, what about Greg Dials? He's now deceased, so nothing can go forward on him. So all of these years that Nash has been able to get away with everything, he's facing these new charges under RICO. It is very clear now that there was a bribe with one of the jury members where Nash was acquitted. And the book goes into how they learn about it, who it was, like the whole, like all of the learning about it. And that was fascinating. And also just like, again, and it just showed how Nash can, money talks. Money talks. Well, things were a little different this time. Facing all these charges, and I think the writing was on the wall, and the game had been played for a really long time. September 10th, 2011, Nash actually pled guilty to all charges. This time there would be no trial. He was sentenced to 37 months of confinement and paying a $250,000 fine. This was in the news for one day. One day. And if you're thinking, why? This was huge news. Think of the date. September 10th, 2001. The next day was September 11th. And that then would dominate the news media. I mean, understandably. But Nash had one day in the news for this. All these years. And yeah, finally guilty. So that is where the book ends. I just threw a ton of information at you guys. But with that being said, I feel like I only touched upon little bits here and there throughout the book. The book does such a great job of giving detail to the reader. If you don't know this case, start with this book. Seriously, it's so good. Start with this book. I'm so glad I have this book, and I'm so glad that it was voted on for book club. If you know the case, you've read 10, 15, 20 books, you've listened to however many podcasts, watched documentaries, movies, so on and so forth, get the book. Get the book. I guarantee you're going to read something in here and say, I didn't know that. Maybe you're going to know most of the details. You're going to find something and say, I didn't know that. This is from the two detectives who tirelessly worked this case, who were honest, ethical, just overall good guys, what cops are supposed to be, what law enforcement officers are supposed to be. Think how many years of hell they went through for this case. And in the end, Holmes was acquitted. In the end, Nash was acquitted, so on and so forth. We know who did the crimes. They never stopped in their pursuit of trying to solve and officially close this case. And this is one of those cases where like law enforcement knows who did it. And it's one of those like, you got to prove it. They could have proved it, but like Nash was just connected to so many people that, like, I hate to say it, but Lange and Souza, like, they were up against everything before they even picked up this case. And they just didn't know it. And that sucks. That sucks. So the other notes I have on this book, again, overall, excellent book. It's from the cops who worked it, their perspective. There are so many behind the scenes viewpoints that you're not going to get from any other book on this case. These guys worked it. They were there from start to finish and then some. No other book can give that perspective. The notes part, as I mentioned earlier, that's like throughout almost every single page. Some were worthwhile, some weren't. Some were connected to like expanding upon a point they were making. Some went on about maybe something else just to be like, oh, well, here's another example of that with something totally different. You know, some I took away and I'm like, I'm really glad that was in there. And then some I was like, didn't need that. You take it. It is what it is. But again, the way that one officer, I'm totally blanking his name right now. I'm not going to scroll back through like my pages and pages of notes. The one that was the security officer outside the door who was interviewing Susan for that book and then planted the bomb, saying, oh, look what I found, I'm a hero. And then it turns out, no, you're the one that planted it to try to, like, I will take 500 more pages of notes, Tom and Robert, just for that one note you made about him, and being like, yeah, he never did write that book. Like, oh, so worth it. Thank you for exposing that asshole for who he was. Like, oh, beautiful, beautiful. People like him, thank you for putting that in there. Thank you. Like, yeah, expose. He gave you hell and you just put him in his place. So yes, Tom and Robert, thank you. The book is chronological, which I loved. Very few times it bounced. It was like very clearly like, we're going to start here. Again, the book's going to start with like, here's the murders. And then like, all right, let's pull the curtain back and then like start from the beginning and go forward. I love a book that's in chronological order. And it's just, there's no reason it shouldn't be, but that's just me. It just makes it such flow, organically, easy to follow. Everything's in real time, so on and so forth. Like amazing. I did make a note. I would have liked Okay, and let me explain this because it's going to sound so morbid. I would have liked photos of the crime scene. And the reason I say that is I mentioned there are some black and white photos. They are of the victims of the Wonderland house, of John Holmes, like the law enforcement office, David Lynn, Trey McCourt, Ed Nash, Gregory Dials, Harry Hoskins, several of the law enforcement officers, so on and so forth. And that's great. In regards to, there's no pictures from like the crime scene. All the pictures in here of those who worked the case, I'd already seen pictures of the victims. I'd already seen, I think, what I mean by I would have liked photos of the crime scene, and I don't mean that in a gory way. I mean like not even of the victims' bodies. Like no, I don't want that in the book. But like behind the scenes, even photos of the crime scene that maybe the public didn't see. Because there's been a lot of photos we have seen over the years. I mean, you can just Google it, they're everywhere. I would have liked maybe some behind the scenes extra shots that the public hasn't seen. Maybe it's the same crime scene, but from a different angle that helped them with their investigation. That type of thing. I would have liked something like that. Not necessarily like a deal breaker. I would have liked something like that. Just because I feel like we got so much inside information, I would have liked maybe a little bit more. Or even, for example, I mean, the book describes all of the autopsy reports, but maybe a photo of the autopsy report, or just something where it's just something a little extra for the reader that you would only get from this. But again, that's just me being greedy, saying I would have liked those things. Not needed. This book is, when I say a 10 out of 10, if I could give it like a 15 or a 20 out of 10, I wish I would. I'm really glad that you guys voted for this for book club, and it was overwhelming votes. I know I put up the poll on YouTube. Not everybody has a YouTube account. I will get emailed. I will get DMs when people say, hey, I saw the poll. Mark me down for this. This is my vote. Like, it was like Malice in Wonderland, Malice in Wonderland. Like, y'all wanted this case. So I'm really glad to have reviewed it. Again, I just threw a lot of information at you guys. If anybody else has read this book and you have any comments or thoughts, or maybe there was different takeaways that you had from this that I didn't touch upon, please leave a comment on this video and let me know. If you've read this book, do you recommend it to other people that they should pick up and review? Or maybe if you don't for some reason, put that out there, and maybe why maybe for you it just didn't resonate as something that you would recommend to somebody else. Yeah, I always like having those engagements because 5 people can read the same book and have 5 totally different takeaways from it and 5 totally different experiences, and I really like to engage with that. So that is that for tonight, you guys. Let me just see a couple of the comments with you guys to see if I hope I didn't miss anything. I know I'm a little bit behind. I think I got a little bit carried away at the end there with the book. Wolf says, imagine driving around Hollywood back in the day doing seedy things. I'm sure it was very dreamy. I know, right? It was just such a totally different way of life. It would be, yeah, just so different. Hard to imagine. Yes, James, thank you. That is described more in the book, just like you are saying. Thank you for clarifying that and putting that out there. Danny, are you familiar with any of Tom's wartime stories? I am not. Steve Harris, I am not. James, I just thought like, oh my God, if that man has not been through enough, my God. Wolf says, sounds great, Danny. I'm definitely getting this book. Awesome. Wolf, let me know. Let me know what you think about it after you read it. I don't want to say I know you're going to love it. I know you're going to love it. The video of the walkthrough is on YouTube. Thank you, Steve Harris. I'm going to star that. Thank you for saying that. I have not watched it, I will say. James Watson. Scott Michaels did a walkthrough of the house years later, comparing the murder scene to present day, and had to step outside. The vibes of the house hit him really hard. Interesting. So then that would be on YouTube too. So I'm starring these so that if anybody's watching this back and replay, it can, especially if you put the chat on and rewatch that, this can be easier to find. So thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's book club. And thank you all for voting for this. Thank you for those who were here tonight participating in the chat. This has been one of the most interactive book club chats I've had with you guys. And I really, really enjoyed it. Like, thank you guys. Like, truly, truly. Like, y'all make my book nerd heart so happy right now. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening. Again, leave a comment on this if you are not catching it live. Do you have this book? Have you read it? Do you recommend it? What is your takeaways? So on and so forth. I will put up a poll in the next few days we're going to be in September, y'all, for September's book club. So I'll put a poll up, vote. We'll get that going. And as a reminder, if you guys have any book suggestions, send me a DM. I'll add it to the Google Doc. Send me an email. All my information is down below. Let me know. There have been a few times people have suggested books and I add it to the Google Doc and I'm like, wow, that sounds like something great. Maybe people would be interested. There's been a few times where I try to make sure it's accessible. I forget recently, there was one that I think Zach Kopp recently recommended. And then when I went to search it on Amazon, it was like a hard to get book, and like if you were able to get it, I think it was like $40 something. And I looked at like, okay, what if you don't do it on Amazon, but you do it other places? It was just so hard to get. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to put a book in the poll if somebody's interested in getting it and it's just a hard to get book. So if it's like something like that, I don't add it to the poll because I want any book I recommend to be easily accessible to purchase or whatnot. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind if you're suggesting. But that's a rarity. That's happened. But it has happened a few times with suggestions. So other than that, suggest away. You guys have suggested some great books that I'd never heard of, and it gets voted on for book club. And next thing I know, my book collection grows, and I love it. So enjoy the rest of your evening. I will see y'all tomorrow night for True Crime and Chill with Mr. Beckham. A lot to talk about, so stay tuned for that. All right, everybody, I will see you tomorrow night. Remember, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.